Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And
But
Shauna,
I
my
don't
dear
want to
friend.
really record it, but
Mute. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys a little background about me. Most of you know me, but I am a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for exactly a decade. I just quit my bedside job. I'm going to be doing nurse coaching full-time, nurse life, health coaching full-time. A big part of my coaching practice is teaching nurses how to write, and not just how to write, how to express ourselves better, how to find our voice, how to speak up, how to be more articulate. These are all things I'm super passionate about for a number of reasons. And a huge part of that story is Tilda. So I love that Tilda and my relationship started with a story. So Tilda, so I was flying to Toronto about 5 years ago to visit my family. I'm from Toronto. I grew up there, as did my cousin Rose, a few blocks away from me, who's on the call. And we were about an hour from landing, and they announced on the intercom that there was somebody on the plane who needed some medical assistance. And I'm sitting there, I was traveling with 3 babies, 3 kids, including a baby. And I'm thinking to myself, please someone else get up, please someone else get up. No one got up. I was near the back of the plane, so I was the first one to get to the flight attendants, and I offered to help. Anyway, long story short, the stewardess had bumped into someone's knee on her way down the aisle. He was making a big stink. He wanted to see medical attention. The guy was totally fine. I told him to put some ice on it and to go to urgent care when we landed. And then I turn around to go to the back of the plane. And on the way to the back of the plane, there's a woman blocking my path. And she looks very distraught. She's very distressed. She's like, what's going on? What happened? And I'm trying to reassure this very distraught middle-aged woman. And I said, oh, everything's okay. Somebody was just being a little bit melodramatic. And then she turned to me and she said, how dare you say that? You are so unprofessional. That's my son you're talking about. And I'm like, of course. And I said, I caught my breath. And then I turned to her and I said, I left my husband at the back of the plane with 3 small children, including a baby, so I could go help a stranger. So I'd appreciate if you'd let me pass and get back to them. Oh, okay. So she moves out of my way. And I get to the back of the plane, and 2 other nurses had stood up. One of them was Tilda. And we got to talking, and she said, what happened? And I told her this story, and I was a little shaken up because this woman had blocked my path. And Tilda said to me, I'm an author. I've written 5 books. One of them was a bestseller. They teach my book in nursing schools. If anybody tells you that you did something wrong, you send them to me. Give them my number and I'll back you up. I was like, wow, okay, this author has my back. She seems to know like her stuff, and I felt like really like supported, and I felt better. And anyway, the woman came back. She yelled at me a little more. Anyway, Tilda and I have kept in touch since that day. That was 5 years ago. And we started a workshop together about 5 months ago. We're teaching nurses how to write, how to be more creative, how to utilize self-expression to tell their story. And it's just been an amazing friendship. I think of Tilda as a friend, as a mentor, as a colleague. And we just have this really dynamic thing going. So I'm super excited to share her with all of you, nurses and non-nurses alike. I love that I wanted this book club to be for nurses and for non-nurses. And this is such a perfect book to start with, because one of the things that I find so masterful about this book is that it's interesting for people who are in the profession, and it's interesting for people who are not in the profession. It really gives a window into what it's like to be a nurse. And it really gives nurses an opportunity to feel validated and to read a book and feel like, hey, there's so much of this book just resonates. The one example that comes to mind is when Tilda writes about the alarm clock going off. So when she was like a new nurse and she had to be at work at 6 a.m. and the alarm clock would, she would wake up at like 12 o'clock and then wake up at 1 o'clock and then wake up at 3:14 and 4 o'clock and 4:34. And every nurse has had that experience. It's like the night before clinicals or whatever, and you don't want to go in and you're nervous and, you just keep waking up. So there was so much in that book that was just like relatable for nurses and for non-nurses. And it really just gave such a beautiful window into the profession. So that's a little bit about the background. I want to start with a quote that's actually in the introduction of the book that I loved. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so Tilda's talking about nurses. We are too quiet. We need to get louder when speaking up for our patients and more vocal about advocating healthcare for all. Any discussion of healthcare that does not include nurses' voices is fundamentally flawed. As the largest providers of healthcare, we are healthcare. So I thought that was really powerful because since I became a coach, this is a message that I've really leaned into. This idea of nurses, we like to whine and complain sometimes 100%, and I think we have every right considering what we do on a daily basis. But at the same time, sometimes it's nice to pause and realize, okay, we can step into an ownership role. Because at the end of the day, as the largest providers of healthcare, we are healthcare, right? We hold up the system on our backs, you know, and we have the most power to change things. So I think it's so important for nurses to be able to verbalize, to vocalize, to express themselves, to talk about really difficult, thorny issues like end of life, you know, healthcare equity, access to healthcare, facing pain, burnout, trauma, like all these like really heavy topics that nurses get to discuss. And Tilda did such a masterful job of that in the book. So that's my little intro. I wanted to turn to you guys and I wanted to hear if anyone has any comments about the book, anything they really loved about the book. And I just want to kind of open the floor. So feel free to use the hand raising feature if you guys have any comments.
And I welcome critique as well. Absolutely. I'm not sensitive about it. Say whatever you want to say.
I have some questions too. I can throw those out. Or I could just go on and talk about the book forever, really. I have a lot to say. So, okay, I'm going to do that actually. I'm going to give a few more of my favorite quotes and fill you guys in a little bit on the story of the book. So, okay, this was a quote at the very beginning of the book that really stood out to me. And this is another thing. So Tilda's writing teacher, I've read her book and I've sent her some of my writing. So now I have a little bit of a better sense of some of the techniques and stuff that Tilda uses in her writing. So that's also really cool for me. When I'm reading the book, I'm like, oh, she's doing that thing. She's using really sensuous detail. She's using engaging dialogue to bring you into the story. So this is just a really cool quote. The quiet room. It is probably the most disquieting place in the whole hospital. Bombs are detonated in here. And that's a quote talking about the family room where really difficult discussions are had in the ICU.
I always found it funny. Sorry, Rachel. Sorry,
go ahead, Tilda.
We call it the quiet room. I don't know if you could. We say, well, put the family out in the quiet room. It's just such a funny name because everyone in there is sobbing and crying out. Not funny. That's funny, but not funny. Sorry, not sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. Actually, that reminds me of one of the questions I have, and I'm going to throw this out to the group. So I went on Goodreads, Tilda. Do you know what Goodreads is?
Sure.
Raise your hand if you know what Goodreads is. You guys can do your little, put up a hand if you know what Goodreads is. So Goodreads has like amazing reviews and stuff. Okay, so I read through the reviews. Most of them are positive, but I picked up some of the negative ones, Tilda, so brace yourself. So some people said that the book was too brash. So one person said, some of the patient stories were interesting and compelling, but others were, quite frankly, unnecessary and crude. One reader thought the book was insensitive to patients and cavalier. Another reader said she was a nursing student and found the stories horrifying. She also says that she eventually left the nursing profession and changed careers.
Because of the book. No,
I don't know. It's not clear. It's not clear.
Just
but
kidding.
It was too much for her.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Maybe she was implying that. So do you agree or disagree? Do you think it's okay to be cavalier? Do you think it's okay for nurses to be humorous? Do you think it's okay for nurses to joke about their patients? And I want to turn that question to you guys.
I think it's sometimes the only way to survive the job. Like you have to make it weird and you have to make it funny, and like it's kind of like a creative outlet to deal with all the stuff we see on a daily basis.
100%. 100%. Obviously I totally agree. Thank you, Anna.
No.
Kim, did you want to share?
Yeah, it's one of those situations where if you don't find the humor in it, you just sometimes can't survive the day. Like, and when you told off that lady about her son being I'll be good. I actually have gotten in trouble more at work for pushing limits with patients, because honestly, I don't get paid enough to get treated like crap. If I'm not going to let the friends and family in my life treat me like crap, I'm certainly not going to let some stranger who thinks that they're whatever. And I can't wait to read the book, because it sounds like this is going to be completely up my alley, because I don't take any shit. I'm sorry, I don't.
For you need to write a book about that.
I'm in your class, so
Oh, coming in October. Yep. She's on it.
So, yes, but I just find it wonderful that you have written about the truth, because in some ways nurses are so put up on a pedestal, but we are just human. I mean, I work as a nurse case manager in a nursing or in a for an insurance company. I sit in my bedroom 8 hours a day, and when I get thanked for my service, I get embarrassed, because I'm not out on the front lines like so many other nurses. And a friend of mine like literally put me on my place. She's like, you deal with people who feel like they can just be however they want with you, because you're just some random person on the end of a phone. And I love the fact that we have that ability now to tell the story and to show what nursing really is about, because it is not all pretty white hats and dresses. It is a lot of pain and PTSD and anguish. And I'm so excited. I wish your book had gotten here before yesterday.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Thank you for sharing, Kim. Totally agree. Like we see a lot, and totally for me, humor has been it's been a coping mechanism my whole life, but especially in my nursing career. And that's part of why this book was so validating. Of course, the story that's stuck in my head. So again, anyone who's read the book, the story that will stick in your head, I'm not going to give too much of it away, but the name of the chapter is The Difference Between a Foot and a Penis. And that chapter is so good. It is. And I love that Tilda starts that chapter with something like, some stories, I'm not sure if they should even be told. And I'm not sure about this one, and it adds to the shock factor, because it shows you that like even Tilda, with everything she's seen, and the book's pretty edgy up until that point, and you're like, oh my gosh, and she's scared to tell this story. What's in store? So that was an excellent story. And it really just was like the raw, what this woman said. What were the words she said? Cavalier, crude, insensitive, all the good things that make your book so amazing, really, like it's so real and honest. And I love it.
It's so easy not to take that personally, because I showed the situation, and I wasn't, I showed what I saw, and let you, the reader, make your decision. I wanted to see if I could write about nurses, myself included, who did have these reactions, but yet were still compassionate, good nurses. 100%. That was the challenge I set for myself, because it's obviously a gamble to write humor when you're supposed to be an angel.
Right. That's right. What I think is interesting, is that with these types of stories, there's definitely that like insider outsider perspective, like with the profession, exactly what you're saying about being a nurse. Nurses are these, like, they're almost like these mythical figures that we put up on pedestals, right? And so then when they're like very human, it's like, oh, but like you have it's such an intense, very human job, and you're seeing people at their best and at their worst, and like at crazy times. And so like it's very easy for an outsider to say like, you can't talk like that, you can't act like that. I want you to be Florence Nightingale, and like it's like, well, it's your experience, it's your story. So it's if you're the insider, how can I tell you how you can and can't talk?
Sure, we have the right to do that. I just, the challenge I set for myself was really that. Can I show nurses as they really are, and still show them at the same time to be compassionate and great, and the nurse you'd want to have there, even though maybe the nurse is talking slang and off-color jokes, and I wanted to see if I could do that, because writing humor is always a gamble, and especially nurse humor.
Yes, yes.
So my name's Paula, and I have the pleasure of working with Rachel, and was actually just finished her first The Artist Way with her and Tilda this morning. And I was able to get this book months ago and was able to read it. And some of the things that have changed over the years, you know, back when we were 20 years old and back in the early 80s and we were young nurses, we didn't think we had a voice. We did what we were told. The doctors screamed, they yelled at us. I remember doctors throwing things at nurses and degrading them. And Tilda has brought these stories from those times and has been able to tell them. And, you know, we had asked her on our class, you know, were you ever worried about being fired by your hospitals or the places you worked? And, you know, I think she probably had a little bit of fear, but she still was brave enough to be able to write these stories. And these stories are very powerful. And if, you know, with what we've just been through as nurses over the last, 3 years, her book is part of that 20 years ago. So if you haven't been able to read the book yet, I'm telling you what we've just been through. She has been able to do that 20 some years ago. So you guys are going to love this. You're going to love Rachel. You're going to love Tilda. I think I worked with Rachel maybe a month after she met Tilda and was able to hear this story fresh. So, I've been a nurse now 40 years. And I've got a voice. I was 21 years old working in the prison system, and I had a voice back then, and I have a voice now. And I have been writing a lot of stories. So I think you guys are going to I love it. And I love reading books like this. And she's really brought out the boldness of nursing that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Paula. And there's actually some prophetic words in the book, Tilda, when you talk about the SARS pandemic.
Yeah.
In, what was it, 2003?
Yeah.
And you use words like wearing masks. This is the new normal. It was so interesting. It was very echoey of obviously a little bit of a smaller scale, because it was
much smaller,
sort of local. But yeah, it was really cool to read that about the pandemic and the panic and the new guidelines are coming out every day. And it was
interesting. Yeah.
Really prophetic. Yeah. Michelle, you've been raising your hand. I'd love to hear from you.
I just wanted to say, when you were saying before about the nurse's comment about being too frank and all that, I think humor is the way. I mean, Tilda, I just read a couple pages, and I'm reading one that I can relate to when you were doing the bowel disimpaction on a patient. And in the paperback book, it's page 224. I had a patient like that, and a brother actually with a spinal cord injury with those issues. And I think people that can't relate to the humor, they're just still too wounded. They're wounded, and somehow, and they can't, because behind humor is truth and compassion, or it wouldn't be funny. So, for whatever reason, but I just wanted to say, because I just, the little bits I've just read, by looking at the descriptions and stuff, I'm so excited to read the whole thing, start to finish.
Thank you for
but it's just, I find the page I opened to was that page about your nurse Tilda wanted to,
and the line where someone has a big bowel movement, and then one of your coworkers turns to you and says, "I wonder what the royal family is doing now." I burst out laughing.
I know. Remember
that? So good.
Yeah.
So
no. So thank you. But I do think people that, it's an inside outside thing, but right. So thank you.
But yet this book was intended for the public. And I had to face the fact that it was not going to be an inside job. It was going to, so it felt like a risk at the time, but I would definitely do it again.
So on that note, Tilda, I'm curious, is there anything that you did censor from the book or did leave out of the book because you were afraid of what the public might think?
Yeah, very interesting. There was something and I regret it. And it's a very small thing because when you're working with the publisher, you give them the manuscript and then you always have an editor, of course. And I would at first, resist almost all the suggestions. At first I was, well, I wanted to stay this way because of this. And, eventually I came to realize that the editor was right like 98% of the time. So then what's left, 100%. So then 1% of the time, I was right and I kept it, but 98 is pretty good. What about that other 1%? There was something that my editor wanted me to change and I did change it and I regret it. So it was in the chapter about, I don't even know the title anymore, 20 years ago, but it was about a patient who didn't want me to be their nurse. They said, I don't want her to be my nurse. And it was a family that was deliberating about end of life issues. And that's a pretty, that goes on a lot in the book. And one of the family members actually said, can we keep Dad alive until after the bar mitzvah? And my editor says, you can't say bar mitzvah. People will, Jewish people will be offended. Say after the wedding. But bar mitzvah is much funnier, don't you think? Yeah. I don't know why, but it just sounded a lot funnier to me. And it's no defense that it was true. You got to choose what's funny or not. It was true, but that's not the reason to include anything just because it's true. I kind of said to him, well, look at all the writers, Jewish writers who write about funny, Woody Allen and Philip Roth, and there's a Canadian writer, Mordechai Richtler. He lambastes the Jewish community all the time. This was so mild. I just said, can you keep Dad alive until after the bar mitzvah? Which I still think pretty funny. But the editor said, I really think you should change it to when. The point got across that the family was trying to, the whole manipulation of death and how we do that in the ICU was kind of the point. But the crassness of asking for that. But anyway, I did change it. I just think bar mitzvah is a lot funnier. So I regret that one time.
It's a little more specific. It's kind of more specific. It's more nuanced. I don't know. Yeah,
I think so. And that wasn't even the time of political correctness. That whole wave had not started in 2004 when the book came out. So that's why you'll see a lot of jokes in there that
I was going to say that. Yeah, that was going to be my next comment. There's you got away with a lot of things that I don't know anymore.
I certainly did.
Yeah,
I certainly did. And I don't regret those because they were. Well, we won't get off on the tangent of talking about political correctness because that could go on. And I just think if it's funny, it's okay. Obviously I'm not out to offend anybody, but anyway, we'll talk about that another time. It's a whole big thing.
Yeah.
But that was what some people did say, even at the time. Some of those jokes are kind of racist. I'm sure you encountered them already, but I could tell you some of them. Kwanzaa, the whole questioning of Kwanzaa, one nurse.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was a very, so it reminds me in the coaching space, it's an agreement a lot of coaches have is assume positive intent. And you have to, because reading the book, you can't come to any other conclusion than you're a compassionate nurse who cares about her patients, who goes above and beyond. We tried to bring that dog in, that was such a poignant story, for I can't remember the details of the story, but trying to bring in a dog for a patient who was depressed, and to think that you have anything but positive intent is come on, but that's the point with humor. I mean, if exactly what Michelle said, if it speaks to truth, that's what makes it funny because there's some truth there, I think I was.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely, what Paula was saying about almost 20 years ago, I'd love to hear what is dated about. I'm going to know a lot of things dated about. First of all, there's no cell phones in that book. quite a few other things laying to me compared to the stress that nurses are under now. I mean, we complained then about night shift. We complained about the grueling work, and it was all true, and it was hard. But now it's exponentially harder in so many ways. The workload and just what is expected of us, and the customer service, and the people's expectations. So many things, and of course COVID. That was just really, really hard. And we all thought, well, things will go back to normal after COVID. But those of you who are still practicing, that's the new normal now. Those kind of expectations and workload. And, we thought we had it hard back then, but it's much, much harder for nurses now, I think.
Yeah, Kim, did you want to comment on that?
Actually, I had a different one. So if somebody else wants to comment, I'll ask my questions after.
No, you can go ahead. You're good.
Yeah,
Catherine?
Oh,
hold on one second. Yeah, you can go ahead, Kim.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So my twofold question is, what prompted you to write this book, and how cathartic was it for you?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, as I was preparing for tonight, and I had been asked that question before, I was reminded of some of the things that caused me to write this book. And there are a few things. First of all, I think it was very lucky that it came out after SARS, because SARS was a really big deal in Canada, but specifically Toronto. So that really helped me get in terms of publication. But no, the question was, what prompted me to write it? It wasn't SARS that prompted me to write it. It was a few things. That whole book was motivated, I think, by my moral distress over what we were doing in the ICU, the end of life issues, pushing the envelope and pushing in what we the nurses felt was torturing patients and, families who were wanting everything done. And that wasn't everybody, but there were a number of patients that we kept in dialysis and inotropes and ventilation, and then they died. And there were so many like that. And I think it's still like that very much. So I started off with those stories. They were pressing on me. They were really burning at me. How could I continue to do this work when I didn't agree with someone? I started with those stories, but it was interesting because then my editor said, well, you can't start there. Start with where you began as a nurse. And I think that's really helpful information for anyone who does want to write their story, because at some point you have to take us to where you were beginning and then bring us to where you came to struggle with these very complex ethical, moral decisions that were, but that's hard. He was saying, don't start there. Anyway, the other thing that helped me was, I want to show you this book. This book, I haven't even told you this story, Rachel. This book is called The Sexual, I know it's coming up backwards for you, The Sexual Life of Catherine Mallet. You're going to think I'm at Catherine M, but it's Catherine Mallet. My God, really did a number on this book. I don't know why he chose this book. It's a very interesting choice. But this book I read around the same time. This book is one of the most pornographic books you'll read. I just can't imagine how more explicit this woman could be about her sex life. And she said that she did all these things that she describes in the book, and she did them for the purpose of getting beyond all prejudice. And that line really appealed to me, because I thought, well, I want to get beyond all prejudice. I'm certainly not going to do it that way, but that was her reasoning. And I like the concept of how do we get beyond all prejudice? And that was before we understood so much as we are understanding now about unconscious bias and about microaggression and all the things that we are now beginning to learn about racism. But I like that idea. I wanted to get beyond all prejudice. So that's where the book appealed to me. The other thing that came to me when that book was over was, when I finished reading it, was how does she have the guts? If she has the guts to be so honest and explicit and detailed about that personal aspect of her life, why can't someone do that about nursing? Why can't someone tell the truth in that same way and not apologize and really tell it like it is and not sugarcoat anything and not gloss it over or apologize or defend their actions? I'm going to try to write in that way too. The other thing is, I was working on another book for many years, couldn't get it published, got a lot of rejections for it, and I was really disheartened. And a friend who's actually a life coach, her name is Annie, and I remember we were standing in somewhere, Jewish community center. She said, well, what do you want to write next? And it just came to me. Sometimes a coach can really ask you a question that, that's the beauty of coaching. And they ask you a question that just turns your, I knew immediately, I want to write about my life as a nurse. I want to write about nursing. So that came to me as sort of an understanding, but it was around the time of reading this book that was so open and free about a subject that is very interesting, but much more trivial to me than what we do as nurses. Not making any comparison between sexuality and nursing, but just, she opened that world up for me, but why can't I open up the nursing world and speak as honestly as she did? And so many doctors have done it. Why can't a nurse do it? So I didn't worry about confidentiality and privacy and all that. Obviously, that did become a concern when I went to when it became at the very last stage of editing. But when I was writing it, I put all that out of my mind and just said, I'm going to say what I want to say.
I love it.
So that's kind of it. I gave myself that freedom. I believe we live in our, Canada and the United States, and we have free speech. And I just, friends said, oh, you're going to lose your job over this. And I thought, by telling the truth, my truth, I could lose my job by telling my truth. I wasn't out to hurt anyone, not to hurt the hospital, not to hurt anybody. I knew that in my heart, that my intentions were good.
Yeah, I love the intro to the 10th anniversary edition was written by a doctor who was inspired by you to write his story. I love that.
That's right. I know.
Yeah. He was like, if she could do it, why can't I? Like, I read her book and I thought, why not me?
Funny, isn't it?
I love it.
Yeah. He's an ER doctor, and
Let's go to Catherine, and then Paula, and then Deborah.
So I guess you mostly answered part of my question, because it sounds like it was some bravery involved, and at the same time, you were focused on telling your truth. And because for me, I'd be like, I can't imagine the hurdle of the questions that people are asking you of what's the hospital going to do, or things like that. But it sounds like your focus was what got you writing. And also, I do have a question. I just started to read your book at the very beginning, through that first end of life chapter. And I did have a question about how you carved out the time. Did you carve out the time with like an outline, or how did you fit in the time with working and writing?
And my kids at the time too, they were pretty young. There's a part of me that's very selfish, and I really wanted to develop myself as a writer. And that started long before I had any hope of getting published. I loved to write, and to me, to write a book was the ultimate. My family grew up in a saturated household. There were books everywhere. That was the greatest thing to be, as a writer. And wow, it was my dream. And I took it. I took the time. I mean, the dishes piled up, the laundry piled up, there was sometimes meals that weren't very, my kids really don't like my cooking, My son said to me recently, patted me on the head, he said, don't worry, Mom, you'll be remembered for other things. My cooking is not the thing, obviously, but I was selfish. I took it. I took the time. I took the time, and I my teacher was very helpful. Barbara, a lot of things came together to help me. The inspiration of this book, and also knowing that these stories had never been told in this way before. I read a lot, and I had never seen these stories before. So I thought, wow, people should know. During SARS, I remember someone said, one of the nurses, we were talking, he said to me this line, I'll never forget it. He said, no one really knows what we do they, Tilda? He looked at me over his mask, and I looked at him over his. I said, well, someone should tell him. Someone who better to tell the public what we do than a nurse. So that was an inspiration too. And it was ruthless. I took the time. At the time, I'm selfish, and I didn't go to too many hockey games. My kids always joked that, everyone said, do Max and Harry, my sons, do they have a mother? I was not a hockey mom. I never went to those games, but my husband did. When you have a very supportive partner, that really helps.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I'm looking forward to reading your other books as well once I finish this one. So.
Oh, wonderful. Hopefully you'll feel that way afterwards. I always divide readers responses from nurses and non-nurses. Now, nurses, by and large, other than some who do, one nurse said to me, it was too honest. That's so funny. Like when people say the cake is too sweet, I've never understood that. Too honest. I don't know how that's possible. But anyway, they said it's too honest. But most nurses felt validated, as you said, Rachel. And, some people said they gave this book to a loved one who was, to help them understand what we do or to talk about end of life issues, because it gives you so many scenarios in that book. So those were the nurses. Non-nurses would often say something along the lines of shocking and comforting. They would say shocking. That's obvious. You'll understand why it was shocking. That didn't need explanation. But they said they felt comforted knowing that there were nurses who were as skilled and smart as the ones I write about. So I really like that combination. Yes, very shocking and comforting. So hope that helps too, because I was on a mission with that book.
That's the key, I guess, is
Yeah.
the mission.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I can't remember who was next. Devorah, but then she said she had to go to her baby. So does anyone else have any questions? I'd love to hear questions from you guys for Tilda.
No.
I also had a couple other questions I can throw out to the group. So so at the beginning of the book, I found this really interesting. And Michelle, I'm gonna circle back to you to finish this thought. So, and I found this interesting because you said you had written a book about this. I know this because you told me, but anyway, I'll just give the quote. In my family, I had always been the caregiver. My mother had Parkinson's disease and manic depression. My father had diabetes and heart disease, and one of my brothers, schizophrenia. My two other brothers left home to escape the madness. So my question is, what did you think of the personal story? Did it leave you wanting more? Because I know it left me wanting more. And what do you think of the way her upbringing affected her decision to become a nurse?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any comments on that, Tilda? On
well, there is a certain irony in it, an irony that I was well aware of as I was going through nursing school, and the irony of it, because by the time I was a teenager, I was a very bitter caregiver. I was not happy, I was resentful of those responsibilities, and yet there I go choosing nursing because it was familiar. It was kind of my ticket out of that world of home. So I knew I'd always be able to work as a nurse. It would support me, and it has. And but there I go, choosing the very thing. I thought it would be easier to take care of strangers than family members. And it actually is kind of, but came with its, baggage with that too. But it's interesting. Some people are more interested in the personal side of it. The second book, The Making of a Nurse, is much more personal, but this one's much more popular in terms of people like to, if they're going to read anything of mine, they'll read that first one. It's much more popular. It continues to sell and it continues to be, on certain nursing schools use it for examples of narrative. They have to say narrative. You can't say story anymore in narrative.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I love it. Yeah, I found that fascinating. That really drew me in, especially now that I know that you had that was the first story you had written, was your personal story. So
yes, but I did put some of that in the second book, The Making of a Nurse, because I wonder, are a lot of nurses the natural caregivers in their home, that they took on that role or it was assigned to them in some way, and even if there weren't ill family members like there were in my family, there was always someone who needed to be comforted or someone who needed encouragement, and that baby nurse maybe was the one, and maybe that as a harbinger of who was going to become a nurse. It's this red flag maybe.
Yeah, in my very limited and unscientific research, I think that's a theme with nurses, that they tend to have been caregivers.
Sorry, you faded out there, Rachel.
Oh, sorry. I said in my very limited and unscientific research, I have found that a lot of nurses were caregivers growing up.
Yeah,
that's a very common theme. Yeah. Michelle, did you want to ask a question?
Oh yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute. I'm on my phone. For some reason, my computer wouldn't work. I think the Wi-Fi's are still being reset. Well, yeah, just what you were saying about the honesty it took and the bravery to be that honest, and these archetypes about nurses are angels. I just wondered how, because I can tell by just what you're all saying and just a few little lines I've read, somehow you transcended that, because we aren't angels. And angels are beings of truth. I mean, if we're going to really talk about what an angel is, right? It's something divine. It's a being of truth. So you're channeling truth. We're not these doormats of we're just going to do whatever we whipped around and do whatever we're supposed to do, right? We're scientists, we're clinicians, we're empathetic, we're sympathetic, but we're at the heart of it, we're scientists. We chose a profession of science, right? Using it to help heal, whether healing means the good death or healing means cure, right? There's all different.
I agree.
Things. So I guess I forgot, Rachel, what you had said that made me raise my hand, but I don't know, there was something powerful between the two of you, and you were saying that, because there's still, what's sad is, like you said, like what's in your book that maybe you wouldn't write today that you wrote then, but what's sad is we're still seen as these like doormatty angels, and it's like,
the worst is heroes is even worse. I hate the hero trope. I think that doesn't do us any good.
I went to, my undergrad years were in the 80s, and it was back then the angel thing was so big, and it was like, wow, no, we're scientists. And people would go laugh at that and go, oh yeah, okay, oh how nice. So my question is, I guess somehow you've transcended that. Somehow, was that the humor? I mean, I guess I'll find out when I read the book. So joining.
Well, I've always seen how the angel mythology does not help us in our public image. It doesn't help us in our angels don't ask for raises. They don't ask for, they don't need a break to have lunch. They don't get burned out, do they? And so every time the public thinks of us that way, I think they do discount the knowledge, the scientific knowledge that we have. I think it's just not good for our profession and not good for the public to think of us that way, because they soon see that we're the ones who offer the information. They might not see the doctor for days, but they know that we are the ones that will give them the information they need, answer their questions, and doing all sorts of unseen work as well. So I always believe that doesn't help us. I worked with that group of nurses that I write about, the Laura's Line, and they're very real people, and they were so kick-ass in such a good way. They were so funny and witty, and they just were such great nurses. So I had those examples of incredible nurses who were not angels, and some of them were kind of devilish. I mean, in the sense of playfully devilish. And I think of those years. It was a lot of fun. There's no fun to be had in nursing anymore. The fun has been sucked out of nursing, and that's a shame. It's a real shame.
I've even seen like I've been a nurse 10 years, and in the first, I'd say 4 years, and I work at Paula knows this. It used to be a community hospital. It's really small. It's in the mountains. It's really nice. And it doesn't anymore because it was taken over by a bigger hospital and they made changes and shifts. But I remember once having the thought when I was a brand new nurse, a couple of nurses came over from another unit, and it was a quiet night, and they were joking and laughing. And I thought to myself, I feel like I'm at a slumber party. Like we were having so much fun. And I felt almost guilty and like shameful, because, nursing's supposed to be so hard, but there's aspects of our job that really are fun. It's exactly. A special camaraderie, especially night shift, I feel like there's this secret club.
And just when you get really busy, you get a new admission. Yeah, that's what it was for me for many, many years. And I don't think it's like that for nurses anymore. I mean, I'm still practicing, but in a very different setting. And I just don't think it's like that anymore. It's a shame.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
And Paula, you had raised your hand earlier, and then I forgot to circle back to you. Did you want to ask your question?
No, I forgot.
Gotcha.
Well, you know where to reach me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's anyone writing their stories. I have desire to write, have that urge to tell their stories. I know you do, Paula. Oh, and Paula's got some stories there. My goodness, she has incredible stories. That's write them, you know.
My cousin
she will.
Rose, who's been quiet, but she's a great writer. When I was in high school, so we went to the same high school, and she's 2 years older than me. And I loved my English teacher in high school. She was a big inspiration for me. And she used to talk about my cousin, Rose. She goes by Rose, but she's talking about what a good writer she was. So Rose
is Rose a nurse too?
Yes. She
Oh.
lives in Detroit, and she's a nurse too. I'm calling you out, Rose.
Hi. I was actually thinking recently how you mentioned how, you know, I had this name as a good writer and I identified as a good writer. And for many, many years, I have not written a word. And just this weekend, someone sent me a song that I had written well over 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh, that's in me. I better pull that out because I know it's in there. And got to make those start the program, get the writing started, because that's the only way to do it is to just do it, I think.
Yeah,
so make it a
and be
priority.
guided and get good and help too and support.
Not quite ready for this round, but it's on the agenda.
There. Well, I will say one of my big inspirations. So Raizel and I, obviously, we have the same grandmother, the same grandfather, and our grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and they were full of stories. And if you could believe it, my grandfather's stories were funny. He would tell funny stories about Auschwitz all the time. He would cry laughing. And it's crazy to think about how my grandfather was the opposite of bitter, like truly like a very happy-go-lucky man, always his nose in a book. And he lived through atrocities, like truly. He was the only survivor of his immediate family when the war was over. And I think he was 20 years old. And he would tell these stories with humor and wit, and just, it really was such an emblem to me of how you can take anything that happens to you and write it or create it or put it through a prism and live how you want to live, you know. And he didn't want to be bitter. He didn't want to focus on the negative. And I remember he told us a story how he was in the camps, speaking of getting really graphic, and they would put a lot of people in the bunk beds, and he had to go number 2 in the middle of the night, and he couldn't get up. I think he was sick. And he just went in the bed. And he said somebody from down below, because they were on bunk beds, screamed out, "Does somebody have coffee?" Oh no, I think I froze at the punchline. Sorry, I think my internet dropped.
Of all the places to be. That's.
I don't know if
we still got the story. It was really good.
Okay, good. Okay. Anyway, does someone have coffee?
Yeah.
He thought it was the funniest story. So just anyway, yeah. So yep.
It is funny, and yeah. Yeah, so true. I really don't think there's any topic that's off limits. It can be learned though, how to do that. I'm still learning.
Acknowledging that we can always learn. I posted something on Facebook today, and I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but you can be both a work in progress and a masterpiece simultaneously. Yeah.
Sometimes I ask people if they would like to write. Like in the dog park, I'll ask someone, or someone comes up, or a nurse. I'm often asking nurses, "Do you like to write?" And then they answer something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm not a good writer." You're not a good writer, but let's say you are. You can learn to become a good writer. You can learn these things. You know, the thing is to have good stories. The writing can be learned. There's books, there's teachers, there's courses. It can all be learned. The question is, do you enjoy it? Do you have that urge, that desire to tell those stories and to express yourself in that way? So it's, work in progress and the finished product as well. Perfect as you are, but you learning all the time. Yeah, I asked his friend, she was talking about drawing and painting. I said, "Do you like to draw and paint?" She said, "Oh, I'm not good at it." I said, "Gosh, For God's sakes. Just do it. It's if you enjoy it. I hope more nurses write, and I think the time is right for it, even now more than when I published in 2004. I mean, I think the time was, I was really lucky with timing because SARS was such a big thing in Canada, and especially in Toronto where I live, and I think that really helped me get the book published. But I think now even more people want to hear from nurses, and for the large part of the time we're silent, other than, we're quoted by journalists, or sometimes we appear on interviews, but rarely you don't hear it directly from the nurse. And nurses are not great at talking about their work. They'll say it's private. They can't talk. They feel like they are not allowed to speak about their work. They just haven't learned how to. Or they'll say, "Oh, it's nothing," or we're part of a team, and they won't take any credit for it themselves. If you just tell an ordinary day or an ordinary hour of one shift of what you do at a party, or someone asks what you do, and tell them, they will be blown away. Really, because all the thinking that goes in, you get on the computer. And the other day I saw my patient's sodium was 124. I mean, I just freaked out. And I went into his room and he was drinking water. And I said, "Oh, please. I took the water away and I eat these potato chips, and then I go to another room, someone's falling out of the bed. Then this is going on there and that's going on there. And, there I'm using my mind, I'm using my, moving and talking and thinking. And it's so exciting to be a nurse, but people have no idea what we do. I was at a book club once. They were discussing my book, and someone wanted to tell me about an amazing nurse who had cared for her in a emergency department. She said, "I had the most amazing nurse. She held my hand. She was just such an angel. She just held my hand all day. I don't think she even took a break." So I'm thinking to myself, well, I hope she did take a break. And not only that, that angel took serum troponin levels, gave her oxygen, so watched her cardiac monitor, made sure she didn't have any lethal arrhythmias, made sure her electrolytes were balanced, gave her lots of information, pain medication, and dealt with a lot of other things too. So that angel that she described as being so sweet, there's a lot of things people don't know about. So I think we have a duty and responsibility to let people know, the public, and to speak about it with pride and respect for what we do. So I hope that there are more nurse writers, and I am here to support you in any way I can, and I can in a lot of ways. Certainly Rachel's group is amazing. I love being part of that. There are many ways of going about your writing journey and getting to tell your stories. And it's not whether you're a good writer or not, it's whether you want to write.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Tilda. Like, I second everything you said. I can't top that off. All right. So, we're 5 minutes to the hour. I'm happy to take any other questions if there are any, or final thoughts, Michelle.
Okay, just super quick. I'm just excited, Tilda, because I have always thought of writing as so academic. And I'm excited to write. I don't know who will be my audience. I'm going to learn this, I figure, with you and Rachel in these, because I just started my landing pages. But I'm really excited about it because the last 14 years of my nursing career has been as a nurse practitioner. And it's the same challenges as the nurse, just they're different, but the same.
Yeah. Sure.
Follow the guidelines. You're still a puppet of the matrix at times. The MD gets all the credit for everything still. And even it doesn't matter, right? And so it's this, I don't know, it's our whole profession together. I'm excited to learn from you guys how to do this, but not in an academic way. Because, right, as you keep going up in nursing, it's all academic writing, which is just which is
unfortunate because no one reads that stuff. I respect the thinking that goes into it and the whole world of academia, but it's really not going to be read unless someone needs it to substantiate their argument or something. It won't get out won't get read, unfortunately. You have a challenge, and anyone who's in academia definitely has a challenge, but it can be overcome to leave that academic voice aside and discover your own voice.
Yeah, well, I'm actually technically out of it now. I'm going into nurse coaching also.
Oh, great.
I haven't started that part of my business. I haven't started the business of it, but I've done all of the, the stuff to get to it. And so that'll be my next step. But I guess I'm excited to learn from you how to write that to our colleagues, like our nursing colleagues, our nursing professors, our nursing that, have kind of not sold their soul. That's a little harsh, but there are the nurses that eat their young. There are the nurses that don't support other nurses or nursing students. Like I've seen how some of the professors treat, unfortunately, those are probably less than more, but the ones who ignore the trauma that their nursing students are going through because they think I went through it, so now you are.
Suck it up. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see
what
that
you signed up for. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just excited and thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to hear more about your writing and looking forward to seeing you in the class. I have a lot to talk about, Michelle.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Rachel, so much. Thanks for letting us in. We didn't read the book too.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm not picky. All right. Thank you, Tilda, for coming. I know it's late there on the East Coast. Thank you all for
I'm up
participating.
writing late at night. I'm writing.
night pages, evening pages. I love it. Well, thank you all for an engaging discussion. This was so much fun. I enjoyed it immensely. Reach out to me if you have any questions about writing. I have a free Facebook group. I have the workshop, all this kind of stuff. I think you all know where to find me. So, and thank you again, Tilda. And I think we're good.
My pleasure.
All right, that's a wrap. Good night, guys. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's 7 o'clock there, I guess, huh?
Yep. I'm gonna go deal with the kids.
Yeah, I guess.
All right. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm gonna close.